Miller Johnson is really proud to be a sponsor of Confluence's Thought Series tonight. We are excited by the mission of Confluence to give the stage to diverse leaders in our West Michigan community to talk about issues and make us think critically about bridging the healthcare divide, increasing the pipeline of diverse talent. And there's really no more poignant moment than talking about issues surrounding equity, and really no better place to be doing it than here at the Spartan Michigan, or excuse me, the medical mile. So we're excited to be here tonight. Thank you for joining us. And without further ado, I will pass things off to Belinda Cunningham here to lead our first panel.
Thank you, Amy. Good evening, everyone. My name is Belinda Cunningham. I am a supervisor for community programs at Spectrum Health Systems. My program is with Maternal Infant Health and the Strong Beginnings program, where we service expecting moms and babies up to 18 months. And we also have a Strong Fathers program as well. And in these programs, we are in the business of reducing the infant mortality rate as well as the maternal morbidity rate here tonight. And so with me tonight, I have Amy Chambers, co-founder and CEO from HealthBridge Financial, Darren Riley, co-founder and CEO of Justair Solutions, and also Kyle McGregor, from the Director of Innovations from Spartan Innovations. And so they will introduce themselves tonight and share with us the work they're doing and the problem statements that they're working on. So Kyle, why don't we start with you?
Perfect, happy to start. Again, Kyle McGregor. So I think we're all best friends here. I think the way that I would describe it to a group of friends is Spartan Innovations really tries to be kind of the end-to-end pipeline for anyone who has an idea, something they want to get started, a business, really focus on that kind of high-tech, high-growth space. And we're just hopefully trying to wrap around and provide any and every resource they would possibly need to grow, scale, build, and kind of achieve the dreams that they kind of set out with their company individually. We're kind of a non-competitive play within the market, so we try and really just work with anyone and everyone in the ESO community, both here in Grand Rapids and East Lansing and Detroit, and really trying to expand around the state with our network of resources and folks who can kind of attach and wrap around companies, but really just focused on how do we get people from A to B to C, people that have thought about that have thought about that idea, that thing that they want to get up and going, and the thing that they're passionate about. What can we do to wrap resources around them to help them achieve that goal, that dream, that vision? What can we do to kind of grow, augment, change, increase the impact of that vision? As well, and then kind of on the DEI side, like what can we do to make sure that anyone and everyone in our communities, not just the people who know where capital is, know where ideas can grow and incubate, where we can kind of accelerate businesses, but where are the people that are just in our communities that have those kind of cool insights, that have unique insight, I guess, into the problems that are actually being faced in their career, their jobs, and their families when their families access healthcare. What can we do to lift up and raise the voice of those individuals, again, kind of wrapping as many resources around them as possible to make sure that they can grow a company that hopefully will help somebody else.
Thank you, Kyle. That's awesome work that's happening.
We're trying.
Amy.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amy Chambers, co-founder at HealthBridge. So just a little bit about my background to tell you why I'm up here. So 30 years in insurance, 25 years as an employee benefits attorney. I spent 10 of my years at Priority Health, where I led product development and I created all those high deductible health plans we have today. 12 years as an entrepreneur, and it's all been around benefits and healthcare. And I'm working on my biggest passion project ever, 5 years with HealthBridge. And HealthBridge has the vision to help people access affordable health care. So we're the first of its kind employee benefit that helps people manage and pay their out-of-pocket. So co-payments, co-insurances, and deductibles. So hopefully we'll get into this area a little bit more, but it's all about financial security when it comes to healthcare, and that's how I approach a lot of the healthcare equity equation out there today.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Hello, everybody. Truly a privilege to be here today with you all. My name is Darren Riley. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Justair. Before I dive into what Justair is all about, quick intro myself. Originally from Houston, Texas. I decided to migrate to the cold winters in Pittsburgh, at Cunningham University. Didn't know what long johns were, like the hoodie all through winter. But now I'm still here in the Midwest, here in Michigan. So I did learn my lesson. But yeah, lo and behold, I'm really fascinated about how we take the tools of entrepreneurship, technology, to really solve systemic issues that are near and dear to my heart. And so throughout my career, I've always had that kind of vision and thread throughout a lot of the opportunities that I've been afforded. Justair is really to combat or bring light to health disparities around the breathing environment. Each and every one of us takes, on average per day, 20,000 breaths. Where we need to be more conscious about where and when we take those breaths, because it has a lot of determination in terms of our health outcomes. And so, yeah, we're solving that issue, bringing light to that issue through different technologies. One being monitoring equipment, and some other tools using computer vision to detect things, and using also mapping technology to pinpoint sources of pollutants as well. Hopefully, we can empower stakeholders, community members, and health systems and researchers with the tools that they can benefit us to a more equitable, green space for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. And so as we're looking into the conversation tonight, and we're thinking about the digital divide and how technology affects all of us, and in fact, especially over the pandemic, right? So we had to learn some new things, and I know at Healthier Communities, that's the side of Spectrum Health that I work for, that we had to learn really how to do our work where we're used to going to people's home, how to now bring that to a digital platform, right? And so thinking about that, how does the digital access impact the work that you're doing? Does it only hurt, or do you see any upsides? And where do we need to see the greatest gains at? Can we talk about that a little bit? And Amy, if you'd like to start, that'd be sure.
So having been in the entrepreneurial space now for 12 years, and then prior to that, the 10 years at Priority Health, I've seen a lot of health solutions that are being created. And I'll tell you, it's all digital first. Everything is digital first. And some things are digital exclusive. So when we talk about this great digital divide, it's serious. So if you're going to access healthcare in these decades to come, you are going to have access to a phone that can keep that app going that you need to care for yourself. You're going to need an operating system that can handle it. You're going to need Wi-Fi. You're going to need private space to access the Wi-Fi on the phone that you may or may not have, or the computer you have. So I'm now understanding why this topic is so important, because everything in the future depends on you having access, a person having access to all the tools. I would say in our company, though, in the very beginning when we started 5 years ago, we had a decision to make whether or not we were going to be digital exclusive or digital first. We made the decision just to be digital first, but then also have other ways to meet people where they are. Maybe it's because I grew up at Prairie Health, Medicare, Medicaid, commercial plans. They all had to have some kind of paper, and you couldn't send out plan designs or EOBs or things that were just totally digital. You always had to have other opportunities to communicate with people that were non-digital, and I think that's a carryover for the 50-plus crowd. This is a serious issue, though, if people don't have access to the tools that they need. That's my thoughts on it.
I would definitely say that even working in the work we did, we were all paper. We were completing all our charts and everything was paper. And so then moving that over, all forms and things had to be converted over to digital and get permission from the state to make sure that those documents and things could be transferred over to a digital form. And what does this look like for even the consent forms that our clients or patients would normally sign off? What does that look like, and how do we do that now when we're not going into homes? So this is really a great topic to be thinking about, and how do we spread that? And so Kyle, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, like most things, kind of all over the board, right? So like my dissertation actually, like enough time ago, was actually kind of just on that exact thing. So how do we come to understand when somebody can actually provide consent or not for research or treatment? So I think people here who have participated in either research or treatment in the healthcare system, somebody's supposed to sit with you and kind of talk with you, engage in kind of a relationship with you to explain what's actually going to happen within that treatment cycle or within that research study, and give you the information you need to make your own decision to be able to participate in those things. As we started, and even this is back in 2013, started talking about all those things, like as we go to these more digital forms, who's going to have that conversation? Who's going to make sure that there's a check and balance to make sure that you're actually not just reading, which we know that consent forms are written at a level that is college plus, generally speaking. They're written by physicians, mostly for physicians, in the research space especially. But how are we going to do something to make sure that people actually know what the real risks and benefits of what they might be agreeing to participate in? And I think we kind of miss the point, I think, a lot of times when we talk about these digital either apps, tools, things we get people involved in, where we think like, it's fairly like low level, right? But as we started thinking about data and personhood and rights and responsibilities for organizations and individuals, being able to make sure that we can kind of check all those boxes to make sure that this person actually has a pretty good idea of how their data might get used, stored, sold, used and aggregated by a different company. Those are kind of important things that we miss the music of the conversation as we're going to these kind of digital-only frontiers. So on that end, I think that there's a lot of work to be done, right? But it's hard to ignore the access gained by kind of moving to more of a digital format where more people generally do have access. It's just incumbent on, I'll put it on us here, you can do that for us and all of us in this room to make sure that we're doing better for those people, to make sure that we're actually providing them with the insight, the knowledge, the relation they need to actually go about making a decision that is in their own best interest and not just assuming that we know what's best for them. I think there's a lot of that in this space, is assuming that we know what's best because we have X, Y, or Z to offer.
Definitely. Do you have any thoughts on that as well, Dan?
Yeah, I think everything you said, definitely a second. I think one thing I would add in addition, I think trust, not trust in the sense of, hey, is this, I trust the person with my data. I think trust in terms of, is this worth my time? Kind of contextualize it within Justair. Our monitors don't mean anything. Our platform doesn't mean anything. If people, one, not aware, but two, don't trust that it's worth their time. And funny enough, a couple weeks ago, we called Barbershop Talk, and we were talking about a lot of things. Will Smith and all kinds of different things in the barbershop. I talked about. and one of the things we talked about, was air quality. To me, it kind of caught me by surprise that people didn't understand, like, is there bad good air? But simply my barber, that's been cutting my hair for 5 years. And I had to explain that and understand that and show them the dashboard, show them, what does it mean? I have asthma. He has asthma, and it starts to click. And now every person is going to the chair like, I'm talking to the new person about that, et cetera, et cetera. And what I've started to understand and pick up on is that, I think to your point, is that we have to go the extra mile to meet people where they are in those spaces and understand and talk and tell them and be transparent about the things that is going to add value or protect their lives or better their lives, right? We're thinking about all the time that a person has in their given day. And so if I'm thinking about spending time on the app, I'm going through this medical application, it better be worth my time in a day. So I think that trust factor of why does it matter to me and why should I spend my time on it is super important. You got to be before they are to do so.
Very good. Yeah, so, I'm hearing you all talk about the data and how we use it and the trust factor in that. So let's expand on that a little bit as we talk about that and about, how people are sometimes even reduced to data points, right? And how do we get away from that? What do we need to do for that? And let's just kind of all just have a conversation about what does that really look like to everyone, and how do we make sure that that trust factor is still there when we're looking for the qualitative and quantitative data points with technology as well.
You're a big data guy. I know you are.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem though, right? I think we leave a lot of this conversation up to the nerds who are into data and doing big data stuff and data science stuff, but the onus and the responsibility, the ethics, like the music of how all this stuff works is on all of us, right? Mm-hmm. Like for you guys, with how you're approaching clients, patients, things like that, like, there's a warm handshake when you get into the app, when you get into the experience, when you start doing things. Like that's the thing that builds trust. Like that's a process where we need to engage folks with transparent, easy to read, easy to consume dialogue that they can actually do something with, right? People on my end can fiddle with stuff on the back end to make it say and do what we need to do, but I think that's the part I'm more interested in essentially is what we do on the front end to get folks to a place where those back end things we can do, which are magical in some instances, and what we can do with data, or what we think we might be able to do with data in the future. But all of that is meaningless in my personal opinion if we can't figure out a way to bring that person that those data points represent into that conversation. So I'm more interested in what your response is.
It's that personalization piece. So you can use data, big data, to for that first phase. But then after some point, when it comes to healthcare, every person is different. So now we don't help people with their healthcare per se, but everybody has a story around their financial wellness. So after we bring them into our system, we really have to personalize things because there's a lot of bias out there, and what we're finding is every person's financial situation is a little bit different, and sometimes we find that it's a phone call that we have to move past the data, we have to move past our app, we have chat, and people get into conversations. I can't afford my bills right now. How am I going to do this over time? I'm supporting a family. I've got this chronic disease. Everybody has a story. That's why we have live people on the phone. I don't think we're ever going to get rid of that. AI is really great, and we're going to be able to serve up better information once we get to know people better. And I totally am 100% into that. Rich data, AI, I'm going to personalize the information, but I still think healthcare is personal, healthcare is local. Healthcare has a touch to it, and I'm not sure that technology can do that same thing. So I'm waiting to see.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like a lot of our Kyle and I randomly run into each other a lot and have a lot of meetings about this and heard about data related philosophies. And I think it's fascinating, like to your point, I was a technologist first. I'll say I still am. I can code all day and night, but more and more over time, I was leading with technology to solve our issue. And more over time, it's like, that's not, to your point, it's all about, it's a support mechanism for the human experience. Everything that we're doing, everything that we create is for the individual human experience and the support that we keep that in the forefront. And so even starting Justair and doing the work that I do, waking up in the morning and thinking about my family members who dealt with asthma or COPD, or playing basketball again. 3 years ago when I had asthma and not having to think about my name or where to breathe, I live in Southwest Detroit. So I think to add some more color to this is more of the human experience is kind of what pulls at the emotional string to make sure that we're doing this with care, be intentional, curating our solutions to make sure we meet a need at hand. But I think the data is the backdrop in terms of one, validating numbers or information that we can return on our investment or whatever solution that we're putting into the market. But I think at the end of the day, we got to make sure that we're intentional about the stories that we're being told, who we're telling those stories, because I think that's really what's going to matter. So yeah, I don't know, I kind of did a lot more jungle there, but at the end of the day, I think the human experience is a story we're being told, and we need to be intentional about who's telling those stories. And data is just a support mechanism of that to augment those stories.
When we're looking at the data and looking at, you often hear like, what does the data say, right? What does the data say? How does what the data say compared to those human experiences really tell a story about that? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can jump in real quick. I think be very open. We're best friends here. My story's actually all over this now, so okay, I'm more open to it on my journey. But the data set, I think it's something I think about all the time. My father actually had symptoms of asthma growing up all through his childhood, and he told me about that and understand his context and his relationship and our growth in our relationship. He was incarcerated when he was 27. That's actually when he was diagnosed with asthma. So he grew up with asthma. His uncles and aunts who was raised by would tell him to sit down and drink some water when he had some issues. He wasn't really educated around some of the health awareness. And not until we got out of the prison system that he really understood how to manage that and being restricted to manual labor because of felon status. And some of those issues I really got to see visible health and financial impacts. And so why do I make that point? Is because it made me humanize him in such a way that locked up black men in the prison system, do bad things. There's more context being the oldest of 12 children. dealing with financial restraints, all these things are motivators, influencers of our choice, but that will make a person who they are. Why that is important, I think, is because back to the last question, is that the data point only tells a fraction, and it can be pushing away. You don't really dig deep and intentional about what the data point is behind. So my father having asthma, me having asthma, people in communities that are often faced with some of these disparities, revolution, dealing with these health restraints, is the stories that need to be told for us to really act. Motivates me.
I'd say in our company, what the data says is that people who make over $120,000 shouldn't have any issues paying for their health care out of pockets. But what people say is they do. We are trying to change how people access and afford health care. We're trying to give all people on a guaranteed issue basis access to dollars that they can use so they don't avoid care. Average out of pocket's $4,000, and the average American has $400 in their pocket. But so often we will meet people who are resistant to these types of financial assistance programs because they say, oh, my people don't need it. They make enough money. They have plenty of money. It's not for my people. And there's a story behind the story. Everybody has a different story. And we are finding time and time again that people will skip care. We know 2/3 of all Americans skip care because they're afraid of that out-of-pocket that they have to come up with. And Brene Brown has done a lot of work around shame. There's a lot of shame when it comes to money and not having access to dollars. So the statistics will tell me that these people should, on paper, be able to afford their health care. But what we know for sure is that it's a big problem in America, and it's something that we have to face, and we shouldn't speak for each other on that. You don't need it, you don't need it, they don't need it, they do need it, and people need it in ways that we can't even understand. So that's how it impacts us in our company.
Like towards that point, I think that's always interesting, and you probably get this a lot too, the data person in a lot of conversations where it's like, well, what does the data say? Like, where does the data point to? It's like, data doesn't really point, it's agnostic for the most part, right? We as humans relate in story, in allegory, most broadly. So how we actually make sense of that data is really informed by our own lens and context from how we see the world. It's not just ones and zeros, it's not just a fancy regression, there's something else like that you can pop out. It's what you kind of wrap around those pieces and how you contextualize what that data that was even pulled in means, or how it was collected, or why it was collected the way that it was collected. It's like the quick story that I'll give in my background. So I finished my PhD mostly on data science and ethics. That may have come up already tacitly. But when I got to Connecticut for that, they said, well, what do you want to do? What is the thing you want to do within the Medical Informatics Institute here? I said, I honestly have no idea. I feel like we maybe missed the boat if this is when you're asking me now, and we're already here, we're starting. They said, you got to pick something to do specifically. And I said, I need to go talk to a lot of people, don't I? Don't I get at least a couple months to go talk with physicians, with community members, with family members of patients within our health system? And it was, no, that's not how we do things. It's not what we do. So even within our academic system, we have this kind of tendency, and it's why I eventually left being a professor, because it's very frustrating, it's very limiting, right? When you don't have the ability to go and have those conversations, where you can't really try and unpack why that data point might be different than what the thing we're ascribing it to it actually is. So being able to kind of have that, again, kind of the music of those conversations where the data says this, but in my heart and what I'm seeing, I can't believe that that's really it. That's not the whole story. So how do we build better data systems? How do we collect data that's more intuitive? How do we make sure that our health systems are actually collecting data that is both timely and accurate to the thing that they're trying to actually measure and maintain? And I think that's why I'm so excited about your company and what you do. Is how do we actually figure out these built environment things that we've known since the 60s, 70s impact people's lives, but don't have broad and open conversations about what are the things that we can kind of attach to those metrics and markers to really move the needle forward. And I moved here from Philadelphia a handful of months ago. Tons of issues, right? So what can we do to make Philly better? How can we figure out why certain parks get no attention, nobody uses them, and people really flock to these other parks, and maybe you're smaller, have less stuff, or whatever. It's like, it's not just one thing, it's how we mash all these different kind of variables together, and that's what's exciting.
And that's super important. You mentioned that, I remember in our lunch conversation, maybe lunch conversation, you were talking about your work in Oregon around and really bringing to light all the different silos of databases, right? You got health information, you got education information, you got maybe criminal records, right? It could be the environment around the person. All these things make up a human being, and so we have to do better. Obviously, we have HIPAA and everything like that, but we got to do better at finding ways to make these databases that have a more holistic view of the person from the data perspective. And it still doesn't tell the whole story, but like I think I forgot the origin story you were telling, but it was fascinating to me is that you look at a child. It was about a child. It was just about
Yeah.
That's really.
But yeah, kind of like longer story. So like working within the juvenile justice system as they're coming into like digitizing a lot of their stuff and really just kind of hammering down, like we know this about this type of student that comes from this area, that's parents do X, Y, or Z. But we can, for the city or the county, like we can access other sources of data to kind of flavor or make sense of all that information as opposed to just saying, like even longer story short, if the only tool that you have is a hammer, everything becomes a nail. And that's like how we create, even for these data systems, these like billion-dollar hammers that really only do one or two things effectively that are really not the solution that we need most broadly. So it's these conversations, it's kind of talking about how we expand our view, expand the type of data we collect, how we use it, how we get it out there. I think is what makes doing this work so much fun. Most days.
So as we're thinking about that and the different makeups of people, I want to get into talking about health disparities as well too. And so as we look at all of the initiatives that address health disparities, often require a lot of upfront work and planning work. And I know that because of the work that we're doing, right? And so any of the health disparities that we're trying to make any impact or reduction of those health disparities or create access to care, quality care, transportation issues, all of those things. Looking at all of that in order to achieve lasting results, it takes a lot of work, right? A lot of planning. And so in our fast-paced world where everyone wants to see that quick microwave action help, things that come right to us really quickly and things, how can we encourage the stakeholders to invest the necessary time and resources really towards making a difference? The lasting results.
That's right. So, yeah, so healthcare equity, we understand a lot more now than we did back when I was running product development, I will say, and we understand the social determinants of health. We understand that the biggest social determinant of health is how much money you got, so we didn't always apply it. We didn't apply an analysis around healthcare equity when we were creating and launching ideas and products and processes. We weren't doing that back in the day, but now that we know better, we do better. So when I hear that question, I think, it's really about every single healthcare innovation, taking a moment, doing a 360 like you do in all good product development and saying, hey, what are the barriers to care? How do we analyze healthcare equity as we're analyzing what we're gonna launch into the market? And we're gonna get good at it. And we're gonna get faster at it, and we're gonna know what we're talking about. And the other thing I might say is that you have to have, in order to do a 360 and figure out all barriers to care, you're gonna have to have diversity at the table. You have to have different voices at the table because they're gonna issue spot different things. You have 20 of me at the table, you're gonna miss a lot of things. So I would say that we have to build it into our processes in healthcare. When we're building things, healthcare equity has to have a lane, and we have to be really diligent and vigilant when it comes to, before we launch things, there's gotta be a checkbox that says, we thought about it, and we've made reasonable accommodations, we've addressed it, and that would be my thought on it. We've got to make it part of the process now, because we know it.
No, I love what we said there, yeah, I think it's a problem to be solved. In my opinion, why we should take the proper investment, why we should work diligently, collaboratively. Obviously, I won't say the word to solve this problem. It won't be fast, but it's a problem to be solved. It's a problem that it's the core of our human nature is health. And it touches all things. I think even our conversation, thinking about financial health. I mean, because all of us saw this week for first time since COVID. Speaking of my one brother, so that was great. So I'm on the line. But when he was going through that situation, you could see the stress of the finances weighing over him. And we know today our prehistoric brain is taking the stressors like a tiger coming at us, not just physiological, emotional, mental, but financial stressors that completely the humans health. So knocking these, I guess, little barriers, out the way, so people can really live themselves fully, have joy with themselves and their family and friends and community around them. I think is important, and it's the, my philosophy is the point of life. And so, to your question, how do we motivate people? I think it's put in front and center. This is what it's all about. It's making sure that no matter what skin color you're born into, what gender, ethnicity, religion, race, creed, philosophy you have, you didn't pick that. Just environmental factors, honestly, but you had selecting and creating. So, I'll try that read it to my list. No, I was kidding. But you enter this world, you're predisposed to these things, these environments, and the goal is to make sure that kids, our next generation, that no matter what they're born into, that they have equal access to, clean air, clean water, equal go at it, and ultimately enjoy it. So that's really the problem. So we're gonna put that away.
So we all know that when it comes to health disparities, that it's generally the marginalized communities who are most affected and impacted by these health disparities. And so when we think about that, and those who are in low income, who may have lack of access to care, who may be, I would say, even receiving assistance from Department of Human Services, who may be receiving Medicaid services, things like that. What are the consequences, from your view, what are the consequences if we do not address these health disparities in the digital divide? Because thinking about even the patients that we serve those patients. And so thinking about when we came into the COVID pandemic time and having to now go to a virtual world, right? A virtual world. How do I even understand what that means, right? If I never really understand. Who has smartphones? Who has all of even thinking about the education system and those things. So what kind of impact would that have for the consequences if we don't really address that? We'll start with you.
Depends what day you catch me on how doom and gloom I want to be for all that and how much I want to give credit for, I think the amazing strides we have made in a lot of regards. But I think to the question about the opportunity cost or the issue with not being able to fully address all that is that we just see this kind of bimodal distribution where the people who have more and the people who don't have less. And those consequences are so much more dire on that other kind of end of the normal curve than they are for the people who are just making more money off of all of those things. So making sure that we have kind of systems and processes, and I think we talked about this at our lunch too, what are the systems and processes that we need to put in place to actually get people to the table? How do we, and maybe this is more towards the last question too, but maybe that's a convergent point. How do we empower folks in conversations with others to call out when there aren't the right people at the table, to say and voice frustration or concern about developing something new or augmenting something that's been out there and saying, I think we're missing the mark here. Can we actually stop and look around and say, who are we missing at this table to actually bring all those points together? Because when we miss those things and we fail to address them, one, it's a huge media gap, and I think the public is much more aware and perceptive on those types of issues right now. But these are real people at the end of the day. They're not just kind of users or clients or whatever else. There are people's lives who are potentially getting worse or made more complicated, or life lost even in some kind of more extreme situations. If we can't get this right, and if we can't at least call out the fact in earnest that we're missing the mark. I think there's a bit more appetite for that now, but I wouldn't say that there's a huge one that I'm seeing. But again, really depends how much coffee I've had or what point of the day we're on how far I want to go on that part of the spectrum.
Kind of this digital divide, maybe we should talk a little bit more about what that really means. Because the more I since we started talking about this a month or two ago, I keep on thinking, this is a big, big deal. If everything in healthcare, I'm fintech, insurtech, pharma tech, femtech, it's all tech. That's everything that's coming up through the healthcare system. Every single thing is digital. And if we've got a piece of the population that doesn't have access, they're gonna fall behind so quickly. I mean, we just saw what happened over the pandemic over the last 2 years. Look at what happened in education. How many kids fell behind, and we were trying to catch up because of the digital divide. Now, we're 2 years smarter, but are we thinking about that in healthcare as well? And it's not just access, it's also technical literacy. It is, we've got age issues. So I was in a startup before, it was PT in the telemedicine space. And it was for people getting hip and knee replacements, so as an elderly population. And there were some serious challenges getting people to adopt the technology. You've got people speaking all kinds of languages. You've got people with disabilities where that doesn't always work for them. How big of a problem? I'm gonna ask you this question. Like,
Oh no.
what day is it? I'm starting to feel like it's a huge problem, and we need some big initiatives around this. If not for healthcare, but for all the other things that are moving in this digital direction. We have a lot of people who are sorely left behind.
Yeah, Amy, I'm glad you brought that up because I often think about it. When you just said that, what the scenario that went through my head was when the first computers came out, who could really afford them?
Yes.
Which households had them, and how did that divide us
Yes.
then? And then also even going further back, when the first tube TVs came out, like how are we access to information and things like that as well too. And so reminds me of that kind of thing. So Kyle, as she linked that question over to you, interested to hear more about you.
I mean, how dystopian do we want to get here? I think we all have to address that as an audience before we get into that. I think it's hard because I think for us especially, and I think you got to get sucked into it because you're talking with us, like we are focused kind of myopically on healthcare, right? As like the thing. But even if we take education as kind of the example there, like we've had computers in classrooms, like it definitely started kind of on the adoption curve you would expect for that. We started to get more computers in classrooms more broadly, but the educational technology that was in those classrooms beyond just having access to the internet was pretty crappy, right? So over the last couple of years, we've started to make those things a little bit better. But are we doing that at pace? And are we doing it in a way that actually changes and evolves with the, not even just kids, but all the way up through adult learners that have to access information and understand things in different ways? I'm sure we're not. So I think it really does touch every facet of life, and it's not just income, it's not just geography, it's not just race, it's every single facet of things that need to be taken and kind of paid respect to individually, and then that kind of intersectionality piece of how you recreate a person back together, kind of knowing their circumstances, where they're coming from, where they were educated, how they were educated, family life, all of those kind of very complex data points about what makes a person, and then trying to factor in something we can do proactively in that. So it requires more conversations, and I think healthcare, we're getting better at having those conversations internally, but we're not really talking openly with communities and pulling in all the other folks, are we?
I've never had a big conversation around this digital, I mean, this is the first one I've ever been a part of, that I've ever heard of in this kind of a forum. I mean, what happens when we have less and less providers? People are not becoming provider. I mean, we talk about provider shortages all the time. What happens when the only provider you can see is on your phone? What happens when we don't have, we have this big behavioral health issue in America. We don't have enough providers. So how do they do it efficiently? Get on your phone. So what happens when people don't have that ability? So it's a big problem. I think we've got some leaders in this room, some healthcare leaders who can do something about it. So I'm excited about it.
So, yeah, as mentioned, only a question about marginalized communities and what is the impact that left out. I think, pointedly, we miss out a lot. Certainly culture, potential opportunities of innovation that would better all of our lives, all of us as obviously in this country, in the world. A lot of things that we missed out by stifling human potential. And so I think that we are hurting ourselves by not focusing on these problems, making sure that these communities are attended to. One thing I think I'm trying to also be very thoughtful about, some language I use, one thing about Justair is that we don't put a censor up, we don't enter a community until we get the proper approval and collaboration with those community members. We don't put a censor up until the church leader, community leader from the environmental justice group or neighborhood association has a written validation. Whereas a lot of smart city, I won't name names, but we'll just throw things in the environment and people are skeptical of it. And why do I bring that up to our attention? That's brought attention because I grew up in certain environments and distrust many technologies that could be around my environment. And also, when you're left out of the space, it comes from a viewpoint that we as a community see others think that they can solve our problems when the solutions actually exist in the community. So I really, truly, if anything, I say it, I really, truly believe that where the problems exist, so also where the solutions lie. And then we talk a lot of conversations, it's like creating seats at the table for many of these community members, but I think it's about time that we actually join their table. And so ask for a seat at their table and really listen and truly listen, like kind of at an infant level and understand the problems through evidence and truth and empathy. So I think to get back to your question, I think we're missing a lot. We're hurting ourselves as a culture and community by leaving or not focusing on some of these disparities. And I think the way to do it is to meet people where they are, not to meet people, but sit at those tables. That table analogy is a little bit sticking on that. But really take a seat at their table, listen, learn the solution exists at that table, trust that.
So one of the things that I heard from that is that if not addressing that great divide in our healthcare disparities in those areas for those marginalized people is that lack of access to technology could cause for their healthcare to be even at greater risk, right? But what would it really be like, and what are our opportunities if we get it right?
Thank you. It's getting a little dark.
If we get it right. I mean, I have my view of what it looks like if we really get it right, but I'd love to hear from my BFFs today. What do it look like if we get it right? I really want us to get it right, so what's your wisdom in that?
The flip side of it, I'll just start with when people skip care, when they don't have access to care, when they finally go in and get care that they need, it's usually 3 times more expensive.
Yep. So
there's a big dollar sign on it. There's $3 signs when we do it wrong. When we do it right, what happens is all boats rise. Every stakeholder benefits. And when I talk about stakeholders in healthcare, we're talking about when we get it right, people have access to the tools that they need, digital, whatever tools they have. People's healthcare outcomes are better and they're less expensive over time. Providers get to concentrate more on the clinical side of things, and they're not always chasing better outcomes because they're embedded in how they work with them. We've got employers, we never talk about employers who really pay for the lion's share of healthcare today. We help them because we keep premiums lower. When we get it right, we can actually keep premiums in better check. And then we've got this great healthcare system with all the payers and out there, and I think that if we get it right, it can help them help us maintain the healthcare system that we have today. Everybody needs a little bit of help, and if we can do this correctly, all boats rise. Don't know if I put that all together correctly, but it's my random thoughts.
I'm glad you asked this question. But yeah, I'm really excited for that. That's why I get up in the morning and coach 3 a.m. in the morning and do what I do because I'm very hopeful and confident that we are going to move the needle and have a better place, a better state of our human experience, especially in this community. And what it looks like, I think it's, at the top level, obviously, I always lead with joy. But you're talking about the financial stresses, less crime, more trust, certain activities that will allow us to thrive and move more freely in our society, in our streets. So I'm really excited because I think health is at the core of that. And when I say health, I think holistically, financial, physiological, mental, emotional. And if we really, as a community, stand behind that and hold each other accountable, and truly collaborate intentionally. It's not the I, it's the we. Then I think we can achieve that vision of true joy in our community. I'm really excited for that future. That's really good. That's here and excited to collaborate with each and every one of you all, whatever means necessary. So.
I think just to build on that, it's hard to ignore the building that we're in right now, but towards like that kind of hard health side. That's like the fun part of all of this, right? Is if we get it right, we can actually make all of these jobs better, faster, more efficient. We can drive happiness, actually, like in our physicians, our nurses, all of those fields where they are feeling the burden of all of this daily, if not minute to minute, moment to moment. If we get this right, we can flip that paradigm where physicians coming up through the system don't feel like they have to super subspecialize in order to get some kind of career that will pay them what they need to pay to live and give them some kind of like career-life balance. We'll create this system where you actually get to engage with your patients. You get to have that relationship that I think almost every survey out there talks about physicians feeling that kind of loss or that lack of connection with patients, that they can truly engage. They can actually have those conversations and that's where you learn about not only about people's lives, about all those other factors that we can't collect the data for very efficiently or effectively to learn what's actually going into their life that might be impacting their health, their care, their happiness, their joy. So if we get this right, we have the ability not only to make people better, happier, healthier, but we also have the ability to kind of flip the paradigm that we're seeing in medicine right now, where people entering the field will actually feel empowered and enabled, like that they are drivers of the community, not just trying to stay afloat on the best of days. If we can do all of that, we can lift up care, we can lift up the profession, we can lift up our communities most broadly. See, I told you to take it back from the super dystopian. So we can pull that all around, but I think like we all kind of hit different aspects of it, but it's all just kind of little pieces. I always think of it like a healthy community being this like 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional object. Like if we can hit each one of these different areas of it, we actually have a shot of illuminating what the real problems are, so we can kind of make
Well, you also hit the quadrupling healthcare by adding in the physicians.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So if we get it right, we all win. Okay? We all win. We all have the opportunity to have greater outcomes in our healthcare, and we reduce health disparities where we have health equity. We get it right. Right? Awesome. So if you weren't addressing the particular area of health equity that you are now, what issue would you be working on? Darren, I'm gonna start with
For sure, prison reform. Something that I've literally made my life in being a child in that system, and and I think the data point thing, right? And I won't hope that I'm fully being is that you look at a person, you judge a person based on those things. There's so many attributes that made that person come to that decision point, and I think while we had to have ownership of decisions we made and agency in that, I think everyone wants to have that. You can't ignore just the factors that would influence somebody more likely to do certain activities. And one thing is, I'm an NPR nerd. I think a lot of us probably are here. Judges that we are here. But there's one, it was American Life. They were talking about it was a black young man who shot an individual just at point range, robbed him, and he was died. It was like the psychopath test came out, and they started using that test to consider someone's return. The test takes in consideration of questions around your past, and it really doesn't do well in the present. I think I think the scientists who wrote me the test said it should not be used in our judicial system. And I think we're still kind of using that, I'm not sure. But basically, you had your family members, you had his caseworker who's now his best friend, 20 years after, he still hasn't returned from the prison system. And so, why do I bring that up? It's just that, I think prison reform and just looking at people holistically, not just what they did in the past, but they can be better and more to make it better. And make sure it's a good place to return so they can be good for their family. And,
since I was young, it's all about access and affordability for me. In my family, I'm from Philadelphia, and my parents didn't have healthcare coverage when my youngest brother was born, and it took us 12 years to pay off Brian. We had a party. And probably 15 years ago, I have a picture of myself and I have a card in my hand. It was like in one of the local newspapers or something, and it said access for all. So this access and affordability and equity has always been my passion, and I'm just so glad that I'm finally doing it. It's taken a long time, but you know, this is my final act. This is the greatest thing I've ever worked on.
Kudos to you, Amy.
Living the dream.
So I think for me, it would be, I've always been really interested in this space between childhood and adulthood. And I've done some work on this and I kind of left it to kind of follow tech and entrepreneur type stuff. But I would love to figure out a way to make that process a little less worse for everyone. I've always found it very odd that in America, and I don't think it's the same way in a lot of other countries, that on your 18th birthday, you're expected to have it mostly figured out. You're supposed to be able to be in charge of your own stuff for the most part. In some communities, maybe earlier, in some communities, maybe later. We'll use 18, but it's like the legal definition. I would love to figure out something to do to make that process and that soft launch into real adulthood a bit better. And again, for everyone, parents, community members, kids themselves, young adults, I think I would want to make that just a bit more of a humane process where the learning curve wasn't so steep, and the ability to launch was a bit more guided and helpful. So I think like, and for me, like that obviously takes on the aspects of like healthcare specifically. So it's not expecting like, all right, you're 18, figure it out, get out there, figure out how to take care of yourself and manage yourself. But on the education side, like how do we actually help people get into something that will help them get where they want to go in life? It's not just get to the next thing. So maybe something earlier than that kind of helps launch in, but also in the healthcare. So obviously I'd want to solve all of the teenage angst.
I have a 19-year-old you can have.
You know, that's my test case. We've been talking about that.
Every parent in America, every parent in the nation will be at your doorstep.
I'd like to invest on taking.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I would say to play out this one.
So of course we're all here to really learn today, like what's our priority. And one of my favorite quotes is, change doesn't happen until we become uncomfortable. When we get out of our comfort zones, right? And so what's one thing everyone in the room can do after we leave here today to reduce health disparities? What's one thing that we could challenge us to do today?
Is there low-hanging fruit in the community to solve in this issue? There are things in Grand Rapids that need to be solved first.
I think I'll start with the real hanging fruit is having these conversations. We have dinner tonight, making sure that people are aware that they do exist. You'd be shocked if you go back to barbershop talk. Some people just really don't know that these things exist. And so when you have those trusted conversations, bringing these hard conversations to your point that make me feel uncomfortable to the table, and then that's how things spread. So the more people are aware and cautious of these things, I think it's where we start to really create some momentum for some of these solutions. So it's like sharing your word and being okay and courageous in those conversations to say what's really real.
I think building on that, like having your own kind of place and space to like call out your own privilege and understand it and maybe unpack it kind of with other people to kind of understand where you're coming from, what has informed the way you think or the way you do the things that you do. Because I think once we have those conversations, it makes some other conversations a little bit more interesting to have, right? We can kind of understand where we're coming from and how we got there, and it makes the future aspect look and feel a little bit more authentic or fun.
I would say when it comes to healthcare, as we're trying to make improvements around health equity, it may we may all be asked to change a little bit, and innovation is hard. I know it's hard. And I just ask that people accept innovation in their lives as a good thing. It's funny, we're very innovative in our work. We use the word innovation all the time, but then when it comes to our personal lives, why did they change that? Why are they making me come in? Why do I have to fill out this form? Why do I have to do all this stuff? It's very funny. So I would just ask that when we're made uncomfortable with change, know that at the end, there may be somebody who's been benefiting from it.
Well, we want to thank you all for joining us in our conversation tonight, and we hope that you learned something new or have some takeaways that you can take away with you this evening to just think about how the healthcare disparities and the digital divide is causing and impacting our communities, and how we all will win when we get it right. So thank you all. Have a great night. So we do have time for a couple of questions. So if you have a couple of questions, we will need to open up the room now for any questions that you have.
As employers, so, you know, DE&I, we hear that term constantly, right? Consultants on staff, et cetera. So my question is, having these conversations, right? How do you program design around disparities, DE&I, et cetera? How do you fold in these conversations around healthcare? So, you know, we can survey all the employees that we want and get data back, right? How do we fold in actionable healthcare data amongst employees to find the blind spots, the weak spots, and push access back to them, right? Is it as simple as a survey with a certain question style? Partnering with HealthBridge? I don't know what the answer is to fold in that process tied to healthcare to lift your employee base who may not feel like they have access or understanding or,
Yeah.
you know, are challenged.
I would say a big piece of equity and inclusion is to make sure that your health plans, I think you're talking about health insurance, work for everybody in your employee. And I would highlight the financial piece of it. I really would. I think that healthcare benefits have become healthcare liabilities for a lot of employees, and you don't know who they are. So I would assume that most people will struggle with any kind of out-of-pockets that are above $400. If the average out-of-pocket for a family is about $4,000 and the average American has about $400 in times of emergency, they do need some kind of assistance. There is, you can help people with access when it comes to healthcare literacy, so spend more time in open enrollment explaining how programs work. People don't really understand how programs work, and we don't take the time to sit with people really anymore and walk through how that health plan design will impact them. So that's worthwhile, and that's, I'm not saying it's free, but it's virtually free. So spend some time with people, and then address the financial piece. How are they gonna afford? Because when people are staring down the barrel of a high deductible, they're basically saying, I'm uninsured. I know you've got this plan for me, but I'm fundamentally uninsured because I don't make enough. I don't have enough in my pocket. There's a lot of people who have the working poor, and we have to relate to them and figure out how to help them get access, and it's all about the money. So I do believe, and I'm not trying to sell HealthBridge to everybody, but I do think that we have to address financial insecurity when it comes to healthcare, and if we can help people bridge that gap today, they're going to be, you're going to get more people access to excellent and affordable healthcare. And that does, when we talk about at lunchtime, it was mostly about, you know, how equity and inclusion does include making sure that everybody has access. Do you think it goes too far to say that that's kind of a DEI initiative, or is that kind of usurping?
Yeah, I actually don't have much expertise on that side, but I think you're spot on. I think this initiative, I think at a high level, I can maybe speak to a bit. I think it comes down to leadership. I mean, the DEI initiatives or processes for the sake of kind of from my experience and my understanding, kind of falls short. It's having true leadership and create a culture, and at the board level, executive level, where you have people who have experience in the culture, who can bring light to certain ways to go about building family. It comes back to their culture, bringing people to the table versus sitting at their table analogy. So I think you're absolutely right at that point of example. I think a higher level, system level, how do we ensure that we are authentically in not just a high specific how we all know how that is, put a face on the website, but really people who are lived that experience and have the credentials to put a position to get them in the right place and time for that. And I think we start to see the culture and some of these initiatives really take off.
Yeah, I mean, I think they nailed it, so I don't want to beat it up close here. But the only thing I would say is, like, I think it's just that model that you talked about is what we talk about as we're kind of going through the program evaluation modeling of how you would actually go about collecting that data. So flip that on its head. So the first thing that we talked about was a survey that would go out to collect that information that we could pair back with data. There's another stuff that has to happen there first, and that's an inductive modeling, which I think is what we were kind of talking about now. Like, how do we actually get different people in the room to have open dialogue in a place and space, which I think gets to Darren's point, about a culture where they actually feel like they can express to you, like I came from the East Coast, like there are people out there making well over 6 figures that are living paycheck to paycheck because of rent, high cost of name a thing, they're all expensive, it's insane. How do we actually engage in a conversation and create that culture where somebody feels comfortable enough saying, like, I'm not asking you for a raise right now, what I'm telling you is what I'm making, which I'm happy with, is not enough and I'm having problems in X, Y, and Z. So it's a culture as well as kind of shifting the mindset from quant to qualitative informing qualitative, qualitative informing quantitative, and then having kind of a reflexive cycle between those two things, where your survey gets better as you collect more information, both sides, not just numbers, but also stories, narratives.
He's a poet, but this is a poetry, it's like. It's poetry.
I felt dumb since we all heard off, so it's going on. So.
You have any other questions in the room tonight?
I have a question, actually. You said that you had a vision for what it all looks like if we get right. We didn't get a chance to talk about that, so we'll spend all of our time talking about that.
What I see that if we get it right, we really spend the time, first of all, being intentional about getting it right. That's the main thing I think is that we do a lot of conversations, but it has to be intentional and not just having conversations to say we check the box, but really being intentional that it's meaningful to me to have a conversation where we're building relationship and that trust, right? And so not being the person that has to be the answer in the room, but being the person who has an experience in the room to share that story with them. And then taking those stories and building upon what does that look like for each individual. So individualizing everything is so important because what it looks like for me and what it looks like for Amy, Kyle, or Darren is going to be totally different no matter what income bracket we're in, or even if we're in the same income bracket, right? And so what it looks like for us all to win is that every person is thought about in the processes that we make in a different scenario to where that box is not only checked, but we're sincerely intentional about making sure that those disparities and those health equities are all met for that one person. And if we can just reach that one person, we will see the trickle effect for each and every person that it comes in because we'll look at them as those individuals.
You can have your own panel here.
I really got chilled.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah.
So if there are not any other questions, again, thank you all for being here with us.
Can I ask one more question, sorry?
Absolutely.
Everything I heard about, it's a lot of things, a lot of groups coming together. From my perspective as a business consultant, a lot of times what I deal with is just too much complexity. How are you incorporating that? Because to me, that's a key factor of people understanding actually what's going on. Even from a product design, if you don't know what your designer, the interface you're going to put in is not going to be understandable for your customers. So it's just a lot of pieces which technology brings a lot of complexity into that. So how are you addressing that simplification that has a huge impact for customers?
I'll try and be quick. That's an obvious obviously a complex question with a lot of alleys off of it, which I'm prone to going down all of them, so I'm gonna try and be as quick as possible. I think it gets back to a couple of points that I think we made here. So figuring out a way to be comfortable with the fact that when you ask these open-ended questions, you're gonna get so much noise in the system. Like, you have to almost create a team dynamic where the fun part becomes hunting down the signal within that noise. So how do we actually go through collecting vast amounts of data, which oftentimes contradict each other or get in the way of each other? And how do we use those contradiction points as their own kind of separate column that we'll identify and figure out, as well as the divergent points from those things? And I think if you start to create the table of those two different pieces, you start to see they're different archetypes of people, experience, design, output. So once you start to bucket all those things, you create more buckets, but I think 10 ultimately, you start to create a system where you can actually start to make sense of what buckets you're actually trying to hit. And I think it's fun. Like, I think it's one of the things that I know I get into trouble with trying to design something where you want to hit every bucket for everybody because you want to make something that's open, that you can do everything with, that is respective of people's time, energy, effort, all those kind of fun things. But especially when you're starting out, it's okay to be intentional and it's okay to be uncomfortable with that whole process where you got to make decisions about what buckets you're going to hit. And I think that the art of all of this, if we get it right, I'm trying to hit all the other questions here, is that you can actually show your work, at least. So you can say like, yeah, we missed that, but that's feature 2. We have to be able to get this up for an MVP, we got to get this to a wireframe, we got to get this to another process, but we know that we need to do better here, and here's how we're going to do it once we have more time, more users, more data, more et cetera. And I think there's a growing appetite in the market that if you can show that you have that linear or semi-linear trajectory, people are more okay with following you through that journey, in my experience at least. If you miss the ball, if you get the wrong buckets, so like you're going to get raked over the coals. So you got to be intentional about what those are, and I think that comes from more conversation.
Just say, I think in healthcare and benefits, it is getting very complicated. The plans are complicated. The new tools that we're rolling out are complicated. I do think that customer experience, the whole CX design, we have to start being very mindful that people are being hit. You're sick, you're seeking care. I'm trying to help you, but I'm going to hit you with 50 million things where you got to log on, you got to know your password, you got to wear something that's going to send information to me, I got to download this app. We have to be careful about that because I'm creating something that you have to access, you're going to create something that you're going to access, and then the health plan creates something you're going to have to access, and we forget it's just not us. There's 50 people trying to access you. So, and we don't want to backlash because at some point people are going to say, enough, I'd rather be sick. So we should keep our eye on that as well. Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad to add something. I was like, I think about this when I worked in DC and angel investing, sales side, and think about entrepreneurs and how you go to market. Kind of X and Y axis. Y axis is severity of the problem we solve, how important it is to the customer, and then on the X axis, think about design and customer experience. I think it's quadrant over here, severity, and so the more severe that the problem is, the pain is really felt, and more complex, people are going to use that for a quadrant. It's probably inverse how they're sitting, but the more severe and more complex, people still go through it. It's actually like it's very complex, but we got to do that, right? Come out that hot seat, but how it's also a good signal of how important that problem is when people are coming to you and like, I really need this solved. Willing to go through kind of that customer discovery journey with you, like you really have a market there. But I think, obviously we want to make it less complex, make it very easy. But certainly, I think there are also opportunities to identify people are giving responses they're not using, they feel overwhelmed. That's maybe a signal of the problem is maybe, not that important to a certain extent, or just overly complex. It could be a little bit, but it's more of looking at it as almost a signal to answer the question.
Thank you all tonight, and we appreciate the conversations. Thank you.
Thanks for asking.